because everything is in flux in the universe, and we all know this. And yet we try to, recognize patterns and create structures to deal with this. And yet, after a while, it becomes obsolete. And it's a really interesting existential question of doing our medicine.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. Here in the Midwest, we've struggled through a cold and wet spring. Winter, grudgingly like an old boomer that can't afford to retire, kept clocking in day after day. Even after the snowdrops and crocuses announced the threat of spring, even after the daffodils appeared, and let me tell you something, those are not delicate flowers because the year of the water rabbit seems to favor yin in a big, big way. I'm not talking about the cool shade of an oak tree on a summer day. I'm talking about below freezing temperatures weeks after they should have been in the rearview mirror. Yang might kill you in a blaze of glory, but yin will piteously freeze you to death. Still, despite the cold, the backyard is a galaxy of yellow buttercups. The dogwoods have been ever so slowly plumping their buds, while the Japanese maple just outside the clinic door has been hoarding its spring leaves. Then with yesterday's sunshine and warm spring wind, its tightly closed buds surrendered into a half-inch of spring shoots. It happened overnight. There was humidity in the morning air. The plum trees are suddenly full of green leaves. They'll turn purple in a couple of weeks. We have thunderstorms and birdsong. All the cats, even the one that doesn't like going outside, they all want to go outside. Overnight, the red buds, they punctuated the neighborhood with fuchsia purple bloom, the beauty and violence of spring. It's arrived, like the flow of a tide that turned and gathered momentum. The season of wood, of gather and burst, it's here. Now's the time to put yourself in front of the rising, invigorated yang, and it's an opportune moment to seize an advantage. Position yourself in a clear lane for the growth that you want to see. This is the time to sow with intention the harvest that's waiting at the other side of the cycle. Intentional focus now, like saving for retirement beginning at age 23, that'll put you on the right side of compound interest. I think that what I most love about the spring is that it reminds me of moments in my youth when it was at this time of year I remember a kind of kinship awakening with nature. It reliably comes around right about now. While nature goes through cycles of growth and decline, and as humans, we do as well. But within those cycles of expansion and contraction, a thread of experience runs through it. That experience, that seasoning, that acquiring of skill and knowledge can, in time, grow into a mastery of inquiry, which in turn leads to the kind of clinical skill that can only be honed from the attentive passing of years. In this conversation with Stephen Brown, we reflect on the work of Dr. Shudo Denmei and how uncertainty is a part of the path of practicing medicine. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Geological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AcuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit acufastneedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Welcome to Geological Shop Talk. In this podcast, we bring you roughly 12 to 15 minutes of practical clinical methods, perspectives, and advice that has its work boots on. In the next few minutes, you'll get a clinical gem of practical material that you can begin to investigate the next time that you walk into clinic. Additionally, visit the show notes page for supporting materials from this week's guest on Shop Talk. All right, roll up your sleeves. Let's get to work.
Hello listeners, my name is Brenda Hood, and today we're going to talk about pulse balancing. Specifically, we're going to talk about how to use acupuncture to balance the pulses. And more specifically, we're going to talk about how acupuncture can help to balance out the qi and the blood in the body. In this regard, we can consider the pulses left and right to be the mirrors of the relative balance of qi and blood. The right pulse, we see the reflection zone of the lung, the spleen, and kidney yang, all aspects which are vitally important in the production of qi, and so I refer to the right pulse as the qi pulse. The left, we see the reflection zones of the heart, the liver, and kidney yin, all aspects vitally important in the production of left. Therefore, I refer to the left pulse as the blood pulse. Once we understand this, we need to figure out what's going on in the body as regards to this balance. We need to figure out if the pulse is too weak and therefore does not come up to a baseline that we would consider healthy, or if it is too strong, which means that it exceeds the baseline that we would consider healthy. We need to return these pulses back to that healthy baseline so that the person can get on with the business of their life. If you find the pulse is too weak, obviously you're going to have to figure out how do you augment, how do you supplement, tonify that aspect and raise the pulse so that it reflects a better functioning of that aspect. If it's too strong, then what we need to do is disperse, get rid of, drain, so that it returns to a healthy level, and then therefore enables the person to get back to a better balance between qi and blood. The actual technique itself is pretty simple, and it doesn't require knowledge of a lot of points, nor does it require that you have a deep understanding of qualities, because all it is a comparison of the relative strength or size of the pulse. You don't need to know slippery, wiry, whatever. That's next step in your learning of pulses. When you want to look at the pulse and change it, if the pulse is weak, for example, on the right side, the first 2 points that we want to consider in expanding the pulse on the right side are large intestine 4 and stomach 36. Don't get your needles out right away, because what you want to do is you want to check. You need to test. So hold the right pulse and then take your finger and use acupressure to press on large intestine 4 and see if it enables the pulse to expand and get stronger. Do the same for stomach 36, and if you find that these 2 points help that pulse to expand, you can needle these points, and I usually needle them bilaterally. If you find only one of these points is useful, then I don't usually needle the one that wasn't useful. So I only needle the one that seemed to get the change that I was after. In some patients, you'll find that these points are not immediately effective, and when you hold the pulse and hold the point, you should find a change in the pulse almost immediately. But if you don't find that, a point that you can consider adding is put your finger on Ren 6, also known as the Sea of Qi, and see if that helps. Sometimes you need to hold your finger on Ren 4. And then if they help, that's when you consider needling. If you find that this does not work, the next points to consider are Sea of Qi points. And you can consider needling or checking stomach 9, Ren 17, Du 15, and or Du 14. What happens if the left pulse is too weak? On the left side, my go-to point is spleen 6. So take the left pulse, put your finger on spleen 6, and see if it strengthens the pulse. If you find that spleen 6 does not strengthen the pulse, my next go-to point is spleen 10. And if spleen 10 doesn't work, then I start looking at the sea of blood points to check if they strengthen the left pulse. Stomach 37, stomach 39, and bladder 11. I typically don't get to trying bladder 11. Usually one of those few points I've already mentioned will do the trick, and so I don't need to go there. What happens if none of these work? You just can't seem to get the pulse to move at all. Then definitely see what happens if you put a needle into Ren 4, or check to see if kidney 3, the yuan source point of the kidneys, provides enough vitality into the system to enable the pulses to move. What happens if the one side pulse is too strong? This is typically a little trickier, and for that reason, it's fortunate that it doesn't occur as often as a pulse that is too weak on one side. If you find that the right pulse, the chi pulse, is too strong, then you want to consider dispersing stomach 43 and or stomach 44. If they don't work, consider whether or not you need to disperse Sanjiao 5. If the left pulse is too strong, then consider dispersing liver 2. And if that's not enough, consider whether or not you need to disperse gallbladder 41. This pulse balancing system is pretty simple. Very few points, and it's just an overall balance of the system. You can do this at the start of a treatment and then move on from there. Or, and this is especially true for beginners, you can use this as your only treatment for this patient at this time. If you have a particularly difficult to diagnose patient, sometimes doing this protocol can help to reveal a deeper imbalance that this chi blood imbalance has masked. And so there's nothing preventing you from doing this treatment and then moving on, once the pulses are balanced, to trying something else. When I do acupuncture in clinic, I find that it is extremely useful to hold the pulse and check points, not just for pulse balancing, but for anything. Once you move on to finding the qualities of the pulse, you can use this method to determine whether or not the point that you intend to use is going to change that pulse quality. That is more difficult and requires more clinical experience, and so I'm hoping that you find that this simple pulse balancing technique is useful for you in the clinic. Thank you for listening, and if you're interested in more, please send me an email at hoodcmcourses@gmail.com. I'm wishing you all the best in your clinic and hoping that you have a good day.
Stephen Brown, welcome to Geological.
Hello, Michael. It's great to be here.
I hope you're here. I hope this works. We're coming at this. We've taken a couple of pitches. See if we could hit the ball here. We've had a few tech issues. For some reason, there's some real randomness between St. Louis, Missouri and Bainbridge Island.
Yes, a great deal of uncertainty. And our profession is very good at dealing with uncertainty. It's a mixture of, probability, potentiality. It's good stuff.
Okay, that's kind of funny. Our profession is good at dealing with uncertainty. I think you're right. I would say our medicine is good at dealing with uncertainty. It's part of the mix. It's part of the soup. Our profession, us as human beings, I'm not so sure that we're great at uncertainty.
I agree. There's always a great deal of resistance to, randomness. And whenever we become a profession, we're trying to control, there is a move to create a structure that holds up against randomness. But as with technology, it's constantly changing. So we just constantly need to change our game. And it's kind of difficult. And we've experienced that because ours is a traditional medicine. We always have to deal with, how to upgrade this format and still hold on to something essential of the past. So it's always this balancing act. I find it fascinating, and this keeps me in the game.
Now, it said something about we use structures to kind of fend off randomness. And that really lands for me. I find myself, certainly in my clinical work, I'm looking for a diagnosis. I'm looking for a theory. I gave up on protocols a while ago, but maybe methods would be a better way to say it. Something that's reliable in a moment of, oh my gosh, what am I actually looking at with this person? And I mean, that uncertainty thing is like a constant companion. And it's tricky, at least for me, it's been, well, I would say a deep part of the practice to somehow get friendly with it, because uncertainty is not going away. I can tell you that for sure.
Yes. And, we've really started off the conversation on a very central topic that is consistently ignored in the so-called profession and within education as well. And I wish I would have been pointed to this. It's like the eye of the storm. It doesn't exist, but it's sort of in the middle of everything else that is our medicine, is how to deal with this uncertainty or unexpected change, because everything is in flux in the universe, and we all know this. And yet we try to, recognize patterns and create structures to deal with this. And yet, after a while, it becomes obsolete. And it's a really interesting existential question of doing our medicine, of how to keep what's essential to the healing process and to disregard or dispose of things that are no longer necessary or even harmful to what we're doing. And because it's not vetted in the way science is, it's more experiential, and then it's written down, but it's not the format for deciding what's a good structure still and what's still an unstable structure or a useless structure now. It's up to you to vet it. In other words, there's no reliable institution or group that is doing this for us. So each practitioner has to enter that arena. But, I think fundamentally different between the allopathic medicine and our medicine is the assumption that we don't know. And we're dealing a lot in our medicine, East Asian medicine, in uncertainties or unknowables, as if we could address them. Whereas in Western medicine, what is unknowable or unmeasurable is not regarded. They know they're there, but it's not something that's a part of the inquiry or part of even the process of addressing it. Case in point, I would take the pulse of a patient and decide, well, maybe he's liver deficient, he's got back pain. And those are two things that I know. The patient has presented with a symptom and I've come up with a pattern. You can call it any other pattern, liver is blood deficiency. But we know there's a whole universe of influences that's intersecting at that point within that patient and between that patient and myself. And when I treat them, I don't limit myself to harmonizing their liver, say, or eliminating their back pain, which would be a more symptomatic or a Western approach. I want their system to upregulate or to harmonize more than I could possibly understand. So if I miss something, I want my treatment somehow, if not positively impacted, at least impacted in a neutral way. I don't want there to be any side effects. I don't want there to be any extra pain with my needling that's not necessary in the process of harmonizing him or helping his back pain. So all I'm saying is the unknown, the unseen is part of my treatment. I mean, because we can't possibly do an exhaustive interview, and even if we did, they would leave some holes. So how to address the unseen, unknown, unmeasurable, I think most practitioners, whether they learn this from their instructors or not, want to positively impact that patient on every level possible. And this isn't true in Western medicine. It's been called, reductionistic, and that applies. What needs to change here, we'll change that, we're done. It's fundamentally different in regards to uncertainty and the chaos of living systems.
The chaos of living systems, indeed. Man, you just said something here that really kind of stopped me in my tracks. I'm glad you were talking because I wouldn't have been able to. Talking about treating someone and in the treatment that you do, that it can impact them more than you can possibly understand, that our work could have an effect beyond what we could possibly understand. That just opens up a different landscape when I think about clinical practice. And I understand, and I think in our field, many of us would say we work holistically and we're shooting at that. We say that. However, in clinical work, and I've been there, I've said, yeah, I want to go at this holistic thing, but really what I want is I want their back pain to go away because I want them to be happy and I want to feel like I'm a good practitioner. And to leave room for addressing, as you say, the unseen, unknown, and unknowable.
But it's more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're asking a lot here.
We are, but leaving room is not enough because actually the greater part is the unknown, yin and yang again, and yin is the dominant or the unseen in the shadow. It is, we know all this. I mean, if we go to, physics and geophysics and astrophysics, they're showing so much about black holes and dark energy. The word is really, really coming out that the biggest influences are not measurable or visible. And yet science wants to go back to the secure framework or structure of Newtonian physics and pretend that the universe runs mostly that way. But I really feel that it is really important if you go into East Asian medicine to know that it does embrace the unknown in a way that it doesn't say, I know the unknown. It says, I know the unknown is there. And therefore, in a clinical encounter, I want to keep myself open physically, emotionally, and mentally to other information. And see, the problem is, and I've had this problem for the first half of my career, certainly, and even sometimes I want to go back to a structure that makes sense to me, but I want to be able to do something for each bit of information that comes in. You know this in practice, that there's far more information we get that's non-actionable than there is actionable information, or that doesn't exactly fit into any structure we're trying to create. So the structure is a much smaller piece than what we see and feel as the totality of the patient, what we're capable of seeing. So just to me, rather than making room for it, is just to embrace saying, I can't possibly know the whole, but I'm holding the tail of the elephant. Okay. But I know there's a whole big elephant on the other end. Okay, well, let me stroke this tail and see what happens to the whole elephant. So it's not making a little room for the whole elephant, if you get my analogy.
Start where you are, knowing that it's connected to a lot more. You can't even know what it's connected to, but you know it's connected to a lot more.
Right. And that's the world of qi, which they've tried to contain qi within the body, like the meridians too, because Chinese medicine, and of course the Japanese and Koreans too, have been, I don't like to use this word very much, but have been infected by a medical materialistic paradigm, which goodness knows it has its utility. It's great for what it's great for. And I in no way mean to, malign it in any way. Everything has its limits. And ours is a more subjective medicine. And what really matters is how the patient feels at the end of the day, not if anything measurable is better. Although, that would happen. Range of motion can increase, other things will increase. It's just, that's not our target. And I think we get it fundamentally wrong when we think we can align with a more materialistic paradigm. And we're always feeling constrained and constricted because, we're trying to fit in.
But are we actually walking in both worlds? Because on one hand, yes, we're leaving some room for the unknown. And we recognize that there's what's knowable and there's what's not knowable. And at the same time, we've got a human that walks in and their jaw hurts because they were in a dentist chair 2 days ago having a root canal. and it's sore because somebody was using a jackhammer on their tooth for a couple hours. And that person would like to walk out the door with more comfort in their jaw. So, I mean, we do have that.
That is a subjective experience of one individual. And medicine is more aligned with, in general, measurables. And patients routinely have problems with their subjective experience being discounted in favor of what's measurable. And we don't need to go on with stories like that because it's the regular fare of our practice. Patients complain about it all the time. And we are in two worlds because patients will see Western doctors. But I think this idea of collaboration is a problem because we are subsumed when actually our world, which is a subjective world, that's the patient is primary. The patient's view of his body and his experience of the body is primary. And our view and experience of the patient is secondary or supportive. And it will never be the same as Western medicine, which is attempt to control nature or to control chaos or reduce it to what's measurable and controllable. And that's why we're here. Otherwise, a profession would have no leg to stand on because subjectivity is real and it matters to people. And yet we frame medicine and it's very effective for what it's effective for subjective measures of, certain things besides pain has been hard. Pain has been very hard because it's so subjective. But I really feel that we shouldn't start off on the wrong foot. And routinely, because we're trying to be in two worlds initially, we end up being in the Western medical mindset worldview. And most acupuncturists don't have a clue where we're coming from or where our medicine is coming from. And you, thank God for Geological, and other people keep pointing back to, well, wait a minute, where's the source? What are we really about? And that's why I really value this conversation.
Well, I mean, this Chinese medicine is weird stuff. And I remember having another guest on the podcast some time ago, Brenda Hood. And she's so funny. She was saying, actually, Chinese medicine isn't completely rational, which I thought was very funny, partly because it's true, and partly, and this is for me, because, look, those of us in the West, and for good reasons, we've grown up with the Western paradigm. That's our mother tongue in terms of looking at phenomena, understanding phenomena, working with phenomena. How we learn this East Asian medicine, it's like, what the fuck? This is crazy stuff. We're looking through a whole different set of lenses and perceptual filters. And it's almost like magic because when you look through these, you can see things that you couldn't otherwise see. You can help in ways that you could not otherwise help. But then you try to take it and like crunch it down into something that you can prove in a double-blind study, and it unravels like a cheap sweater. So I think it's hard for us.
Well, it seems that the statement that we're not completely rational is more accurately placed in, I cut my teeth as an interpreter and a translator, and I'm sure the readers who know my name, or the listeners rather, I'm hoping they're readers too of my books I've translated. Parsing words, I mean, how things are worded, if there's a limit, language has limit, but I would say that our medicine is not completely subjective, and Western medicine isn't completely objective. In other words, we both have our realms. And what we're really looking at here is the subjective realm, which is messy in some ways. It's a realm of art. And then the objective realm, which is a realm of math and science. And both of these coexist, just as yin and yang do. But the point of diminishing returns is reached when you try to be hyper objective. They found this with physics, the observer phenomenon. I'm sure you might have heard of that. So, and if you try to be completely subjective, that doesn't work either. Some the system works. The extreme yang turns to yin, extreme yin turns to yang. And so the two are mutually supportive. And yet the source of our medicine comes from a subjective experience without a lot of objective, scientific type of work. It's called empiricism. It's based on experience and accumulation of experience and documentation and so forth. But it's a lot less rigorous in terms of making sure everyone agrees, or that the sample sizes are the same, or the doses are the same, or blah, blah, blah. So when you take our work, which is subjective both for the patient and the practitioner, it's often said that you can't repeat the same treatment twice, even on the same patient. Yeah, how can you step into the same river twice? So you take that and you try to objectify that.
Well, you can't. I mean, how many of us have had the experience? You do a treatment, something marvelous happens. The patient comes back, they're very different, and they usually will say something to the effect of, "That was amazing, do that again." It's like, yeah, you can't. You could do the same points, but it won't have the same effect. It's a different time. And here's the main thing, as far as I can tell, because they had an incredible experience and because they're in some ways fundamentally different, you can't treat them the same. They're not the same as they were. Now you got to figure out where they are. Where are they now? What's needed now? Yeah?
Yeah, and again, that you're pointing again to the difficulties of our practice in subjectivity. And if we started from there and we keep referring back to there as our home base, rather than trying to validate ourselves to patients or other people, we would be more effective in guiding the patients toward a better subjective experience of their bodies and their emotions. And yet we're kept pointing, and this is the thing, we're all steeped in Western thinking, which objectifies things. And things are always in flux, and things could manifest better subjectively for a person or a little worse. And when you get a little bit better, the chances of feeling even better is harder in a certain way. And we don't think about this clearly enough. But let me go back to one point you made about us wanting to help the patient with their symptom. That's what the patient wants. But if that's what we want, we're collapsing into the patient's view, which often is limited, of course, and it's this very, very same view that brought that symptom with it. So without a bigger framework, we can't really help them that much. If the patient says, "Oh my God, this is horrible, I need to get rid of it," and you repeat that same line, and that's all you do, you have two people who are resisting a certain phenomenon, paying attention, a lot of attention to back pain, if that's the symptom we're looking at. And we need to be able to hold a frame that holds both possibilities. This back pain could stay the same, this back pain could get better, this back pain could get worse. But those are all equally possible. And somehow I have to be a little bit closer to neutral, a little less invested in a positive outcome. I mean, as a possibility, not, of course, we want the patient to thrive, but we just can't be in resistance. Yeah, it doesn't work to collapse into the patient's, because that's a chi stagnation, if you want to think about it. It's a potential stagnation. If I think, oh shit, if I don't get him better, that means I'm no good. That's, and we all do it, but we have to latch on to something better. And therefore we have skills like.
It's part of the tacit agreement of medicine in the West.
And thus the great disappointment, and it's a shame because Western medicine is so good, but we put all of our hopes, subjective and objective. It's almost you're expecting them to be God. And then, of course, they fail to do so. And there's a lot of anger and even legal problems. Yeah, we expect too much of that and too little of ourselves. Like, it's almost as if we have this wonderful technology that we're using, but I don't want to learn anything more about computers. I just want it to completely do everything for me. And it's irresponsible. If you're going to use technology or if you're going to use medicine, you need to know that it can do some things for you and it can't do other things. And that's what shocks me about some patients is they have a displaced trust in medicine. And when it fails, then they feel let down.
Well, I think they come about it fairly. Stephen. It's the tacit agreement that you've got a problem, we're going to fix your problem. In fact, we're not even going to ask for too much participation on your part. That's kind of the promise of modern medicine. And sometimes it can really deliver like crazy. Often it doesn't. And where there's that delta of difference, that's where people get dissatisfied and troubles arise, or they end up in our offices. So there's that. It's good for our business. But I want to come back to this piece, and I'm going to call it practitioner development. I hate that term. Cultivation, I hate that term. But it's something about us becoming, let's say, more refined in our work, for lack of a better term, where we can approach it with a little bit of indifference, actually. Not indifference to the work. By all means, we're fully engaged in the work, but, a little indifference to outcome so that we're not at the beck and call of the outcome, that our ego is not working in service of an outcome. And then I think there's some room for that unknown part of the elephant that you were talking about earlier. The question I've got is, how do we inculcate that kind of refinement in ourselves? You've spent a lot of time doing this work, and you've also spent a lot of time with amazing practitioners like Dr. Shudo. You translated a number of his books, including a fairly recent one. What would Dr. Shudo have to say about this?
He's always been an inspiration to me. And the way Dr. Shudo frames a very key theme here, which is practitioner cultivation, which I think is a fair term because our medicine is about cultivation of health and qi. He says there's first of all knowledge. This is book learning. You could buy any number of books or DVDs and you can acquire knowledge about something. And this is very important. And of course, you then need technique. Even if you're dispensing herbs, you need to have technique and you need to have a refinement, particularly if you do raw herbs. It's not just a matter of knowing. You need to know how to handle herbs. There's a handling that has to happen. So your hands, cultivating your hands, shoufa, as they say in Chinese. And then the third, but not least, is what he says, heart, mind. And this is the person's awareness, basically. So between knowledge, technique, and awareness, Dr. Shudo says awareness is most important, which is stunning because everything is important, but there's a triad of cultivation. But as far as internal medicine is concerned, we're not so sure the way they approach things. So cultivation, this is key. And unless we're committed to a lifetime of learning and practicing, we have no business really being in this profession. There's lots of other things we could do. We could be a teacher because you could really get heavy into knowledge. But as a practitioner, it's incumbent on us. It's really important that we have some people who really embody the medicine in a way that's complete, including, knowing the origins or the roots of our medicine in a way that is not just superficial, because anybody can learn the acupuncture points and anybody can learn to insert needles quite simply. And there's quite a bit of outcry among the acupuncture profession about dry needling technique where the physical therapists are starting to use trigger point therapy. That's a whole nother conversation, but that's not really East Asian medicine. It's a fragment. It's part of it, and I'm not saying it's wrong or anything, but I will say that it's stuck in a more objective paradigm and symptom management paradigm rather than a harmonizing paradigm, which again is not wrong. It's just not for me. And I think the public needs to see that we're aiming squarely for their heart mind and balance, not just their back pain going away. Because sometimes sometimes it's the wrong work. It's beyond needles. And until we're able to at least point to it and talk about it, and we don't need to be, shrinks or anything like that. We can just be ourselves and talk about how they're a whole person and how their back fits into the picture of their life, and then guide them towards harmonizing, or at least.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHEOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Okay, I've got a super troublesome question. Something I struggle with as well. So that's why I'm asking it. That, it's like on a good day, I feel like I make a connection with my patient. It kind of goes okay. But Stephen, there are those times where I'm not really getting any worthwhile progress. All right. They're not really feeling better. I don't feel like I'm being helpful. I could do some psychobabble, like holistic, this, that, and the other thing as kind of an excuse. And I know I can do it because I've done it. I hate to admit it, but I've done it. It's kind of like, well, I'm going to talk me and them into, right? So you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, the reason I bring it up is because this is a little bit the dangerous side of subjectivity. This is the dangerous side of, air quotes, holism, that we kind of believe our own bullshit. Now, I just want to stick a pin in that for a second, because the other side of it is sometimes you'll really be connected to somebody. You'll say something in clinic. It seems completely innocuous to you. They hear it. Their eyes get big as saucers, and their world is different. And things actually start to get better after that point. You didn't even put a needle in. Something just happens. So that can also happen as well. So we got those two sides. Something amazing happens just because of words, and then something gets even more stagnated because of our words.
Right. It's the ego. In other words, if I'm in there thinking I can say something wise or smart and enlighten them, that's exactly the energy and the kind of thing that creates a blockage. Could be. Like you said, if you offhandedly said something, or it's just part of your routine, what you tell patients about how things work and how things are, and it just happens to land, it's more those unintentional ones that seem to work. So again, not trying to use words as a psychotherapist might, but not trying to harmonize them with words, but just doing my practice and having the the guts to just stomach my sense of inadequacy. I mean, vis-a-vis, I've been treating this patient 5, 6, 7 times, and they're not happy with the results, and neither am I. And I feel frustrated. And can I still be there with them and continue with my routine? Because, I tell patients this right away is that it's like I'm a stepping stone to perhaps another practitioner. Maybe it's my technique, maybe it's my knowledge, but I'm insufficient for them. And I don't see that as a negative, like, oh, another failure, another failure, another failure, bingo. It's sort of like relationships. I mean, I don't know, some people have had serial marriages or relationships, but I think each relationship you learn something. And then the next relationship, at least it's been true for me, I'm better for that next person. And I sort of see that in, aside from malpractice or, people who are incompetent, because there are situations where a person is definitely not for you, and that's fine. But in general, if you do your best and they do their best to hang in there, and then you reach a point where, okay, it looks like, looking for something different. I don't see that as a failure. I see that as a kind of part of the search. And it helps me because I take these cases of people who've abruptly ended their treatment, and I've thought, oh, that's been a waste for me, a waste for them. I didn't figure out if they got better, But now I've turned it around to say, no. I learned something. I learned to hold that uncertainty and not getting better. And it's really interesting because Dr. Shudo has been the greatest, inspiration in this end. And it took me a long time to realize this, but the really great practitioners, the ones who are famous and see a lot of patients, they don't get such good results as I thought at first. What they have is that ability to hang in there and not blame the patient, but their ability to continue trying. I mean, he sees patients sometimes for a year before they even start getting better. But somehow the patient believes that he can manage to do that. How long can you hang in there with the uncertainty? And I'm afraid, until more recently, would throw in the towel before the patient. And that's not good. We both have to say, you know what? We've both given it a fair shot. I wish you well, but I've reached my limit. And, to have that conversation. But it's still not a loss because if it's a subjective world, there's always learning happening. And if you learn something doesn't work, you can try something else. But I believe more often than not, patients, and I'm afraid I've been having too much the patient's view, give up too soon. I mean, some patients give up in 3 treatments. And in China, certainly in China, you don't, 10 treatment is just a beginning. But we're much too impatient over here. And then we sort of buy into that impatience. And that's the problem.
Well, I know that I've got that kind of impatience. I for sure have that kind of impatience. Because for me, if I'm not seeing some kind of shift in some way, it doesn't mean they're better, but it's like if the wind's not blowing in a slightly different direction after the 3rd or 4th treatment, I'm thinking I might not be able to be helpful. And maybe I'm just giving it not enough time, but Stephen, I got to tell you, this thing of maybe 10 treatments before you start to notice something, I'm thinking, no, that just means I'm a shitty practitioner. I mean, that's just me. I feel like something should be subjectively tangible in the first 4 to 5 treatments.
Yeah, it's a sense of engagement. You're not saying, okay, 10 treatments for everybody, whether I feel anything or you feel anything, we're going to give it 10. It's not an either or situation. And I like that because you're adding some flexibility to the situation and I do this too with patients. I say, you can schedule more and we'll do that, but you're not bound to them because in a subjective world, it's like your second date and your third date. You've got to decide that it's working for both of you. And to say that we're going to have 10 dates or 10 treatments every time, even though I think we're, in the West, we're a little squeamish about subjectivity. And even using such an analogy seems like, oh, we're talking about medicine here. It must be more cut and dried, and it must be more, non-emotional. But it's interesting that in Japan, the term chi is equated more closely to emotions than anything else. If you told a Japanese, my chi feels bad, they're equated directly to your having. So emotionality and subjectivity are just almost synonymous. But we're a little squeamish about that in a professional clinical setting. And I'm not talking about love or any kind of strange attachment. That's beside the point. But I'm talking about it is very much like attracts like. Dr. Shudo says that. He says, people who I get along with stick around, and people who I don't get along with tend to leave. And it's interesting because he doesn't ask people to come back. He always lets his patients want to reschedule.
I think that's true.
But some people, for business reasons or other reasons, have set up a model, a structure that frames it in a way that's sometimes inflexible and doesn't fit the situation. And I really like how you want to feel your way into it. And if you feel good about going for 10, you would. But somewhere you feel like, I think this patient, for identifiable or vague reasons, it just doesn't feel like a fit. I think it's right to help them move on to their next experience. But I really am glad you're doing this conversation because we really don't talk enough about this.
Well, here's another piece. Well, I don't know. I mean, you've been more in schools than I have, so I don't know what goes into the training of new practitioners. But I can tell you from clinical experience and what my clinic has taught me, sometimes I'll get to that point where it's like, I don't think I'm going to be able to help you. And I'll have that conversation. I'll be very straightforward with it. It's like, look, I'm not trying to get rid of you, and I'm not trying to tell you to go away, but I'm just concerned I might not be that helpful for you. And I've had patients say, yeah, I think you're right. And I've had other patients say, I want to go a little further down the road. I know we haven't reached an endpoint. Like, I think there's more to do here, but you seem to have some kind of handle on looking at things in a way that I think might be helpful. So, like, could I schedule a few more? It's like, yeah, sure. And then they're like, let's check in 3 more treatments and see where you're at. I find people, at least the people that tend to see me, they like that. They like that I know that I'm looking out for them, that I'm trying to take care of them, and that I care for them and I want them to go away as soon as they can, as well as they can.
Exactly. So your clinical practice is squarely in the subjective realm of therapy or treatments as a learning process. And we're learning, our body mind is learning with that practitioner. And at a certain point, you reach where that's not what you want to learn, or you've learned as much as you want to learn. But it's something the patient selects. And I rarely turn a patient away based on that. But again, I don't think our profession frames our medicine that way enough to where patients know what they're coming into. And if they knew more, that how much it required of them.
Well, no, but I mean, Stephen, how could they? How could they know? Well, I don't know, like Pacific Northwest, a lot of people have had experience with acupuncture, so there's that. But, I live here in Missouri. I saw somebody just this morning, brand new patient, and they come in and they go, well, I don't know much about acupuncture. And I'm like, well, why should you?
Yeah. So, it's incumbent on us to inform them.
Okay. So do we inform them with a story? Do we inform them with, well, this is how it goes? Or do we inform them with the way that we are and the way that we treat, and the experience that they get is what informs them? I mean,
well, I would start with saying that it's about you.
I know practitioners that hand out brochures about what to expect.
Right. And we could talk about East Asian medicine, or we could talk about what acupuncture is or what we're going to do, all those things. But I think more important, we should put the spotlight on them and talk about it's about your energy. And our work is to balance and, increase your energy, which then heals your body. This harmonizing invariably builds or cultivates energy. And that's what's doing the healing. And I'm the assistant. We're a team here. But if there's a leader in the team, actually, you're the leader and I'm the supporter. Like it's almost like you're a coach. And the coach can't actually run as fast or throw as far as, the player himself. But again, you know a lot about the game. But that analogy holds because it's subjective and how far the patient's goals matter a lot. So really talking about it's about you and your goals, and I want to support them and what you need to do to get to where you go and how I can help you. And these are the skills I do. In my case, I do acupuncture, mokusubukshin, and shiatsu sotai. Those three, two body work modalities, and one is acupuncture, mokusubukshin. But I think telling them what I do is secondary to telling them what they need to do to make the best use of my medicine. But again, as you well know, patients are different.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with the spotlight on me.
And some people will be able to absorb that right away, and some people might need to have it spoon-fed. But it's the same thing. The main thing is not to give them too much information or, too much to do right away. But since my practice doesn't have herbs, the take-home stuff is usually an exercise or a mox at home or something like this. So it involves, patient participation. And without that, I notice patients who are unwilling to do anything with and for themselves they just don't return and they don't do as well. It's just basic tendency that those who are able to help themselves or take more time outside. It's true. I also teach Tai Chi and Qigong, not to my patients. Some patients do come to Qigong classes, but I do teach classes, and those students who practice Qigong or Tai Chi outside the class are the ones who stick around, and those who just come once a week and practice they don't get very far. But, again, maybe Qigong's not for them. Maybe they want yoga. Maybe they have a better teacher somewhere else. And that's all learning.
There's also that piece, it's like our nutrition. It's like anything. If we put some attention on something and we put some effort into it, then it deepens. Like put your attention there, it deepens.
Thank you for saying that. That's exactly what patients need to add.
Which sounds easy, but that, it's easy to get distracted.
Yeah. It's attention. In the end, it's intention and attention of the patient that we need because it's in the subjective realm. In medicine, for most things, except for physical therapy, perhaps, the patient doesn't need to be there. Just lay there and get the MRI or whatever, just get the blood draw. The patient doesn't have to have intention, attention. But without their intention, attention, in alignment with ours, our work is much, much weaker. And we could, both of us could come up with dozens of examples of patients who had that or didn't have that.
Well, I find medicine is a participatory sport.
Definitely, it's a team thing. Jason Robertson, who's a good friend of mine, and we have conversations of this caliber all the time. We see E as E, as medicine as intention. He's talked about that many times. And I'm really in alignment with that concept. A team sport, it's a participatory sport, but what is participating is E, and it really is key that the patient is educated to realize that, oh my God, me being present, and nowadays we have words like mindfulness, but that really matters. I can check out and go to sleep, that's fine. But when I'm not asleep, there's places I can put my attention that would help the qi or not. And in acupuncture, Chinese style in particular, patients just have to lay there. And, usually there's a long process of the needles being there. But it doesn't have to take that long. And that's what's interesting about Dr. Shudo's work is through long years of practice, and if you read his recent book, you would find the evolution of his practice because it's 50 years. He has this earlier case studies. He used to retain many needles. He didn't used to have this contact or non-retained needling, but he gradually transitioned through his own experience to a style that's much less invasive. But again, the patient's intention is key in that process.
How would Dr. Shudo frame the importance of the patient's frame of mind in the process? What would he have to say about that? And secondly, just as a follow-up, this might be too much, but I'm going to ask anyway, what can we do as practitioners to help engage that?
And I think for the patient's part, the most important thing is to trust, and that would mean to relax and also give feedback. In other words, if a needle is placed in or something is, to give the practitioner feedback on how that needling is. In other words, not every time, not every point, but it seems to me that some patients are very, very passive where whatever you do is okay. And other patients are trying to comment on everything. But the main thing is they're not commenting on something that's a story about their condition, but, oh, that needle feels there, or that in the moment, what's happening to my body. So he wants the patient to trust what he's doing and then give him feedback about comfort, discomfort, or neutral, just being ready to give him information about tender points. And that's the thing, not to be too passive and not to be too talkative. Being too talkative or going on and on with your story about all your symptoms is just a sign that you don't think they have enough information, or you just need to be heard and you're not listening, because the patient's role is to listen, and that listening can be physical, and then to give feedback, what the body sensation might be. And this is what's different about the Japanese style and the Shudo style in particular, is that it's very interactive. Yeah, there's not a long period of needles and the patient hanging out together. The longest he would retain a needle would be 10 minutes. And that's generally how long I do.
So Dr. Shudo is more like put a needle in, get some kind of interaction between the needle and the person, take it out, move on to something else, move on to something else, move on to something else. Is that how he works?
Yes, it's exactly right. He might not stay on a point for more than half a minute. Sometimes he might even touch a point less than a second. And that's because his standard for having connected to a point and having reached his effect is based on what he calls the arrival of qi. Acupuncturists have heard about da qi, which is the sensation that the patient feels. And this is where the patient would feed back to Dr. Shudo or to me, saying, oh, I feel that. And of course, that's very common in our profession. But he also values the arrival of qi, which is a sense of change at the point. And that could be felt within a few seconds. And you feel like, okay, the point is on, or the point has been engaged enough. And typically, arrival of qi, this is just a gross generalization, but the arrival of qi is when you're trying to tonify or activate a point. And the da qi, it comes in the case of when you're trying to drain or disperse a point. But the arrival of qi is something that the practitioner feels even without the patient. Some patients can feel it. The sensitive patients who feel a lot of, pre-da qi, the subtle qi, versus da qi would be very clear to the patient.
So, Stephen, for you as a practitioner doing the work, when you experience the arrival of qi, what's that like for you?
I feel it in my whole body. I don't feel it in the hands as much. But sometimes it starts in the hands where I'm connecting. See, the Japanese and Shudo style as well tend to hold the body of the needle as well as the handle of the needle. But that's not necessary either. But it just so happens we use setae needles with a plastic handle, so it helps to hold the metal part of the needle. So if you had a metal handle, one hand would be fine. But you feel a very soft, I'll call it a tingly sensation, but it's not a strong sensation like numbness that washes over my arms and shoulders and face and body down to my feet. It's like a whole body sensation. And it feels relaxing. It feels good. And this is something that always mystified me. I've always wondered why Dr. Shudo could see more than 50 people a day and never be tired. And then I realized that he was borrowing or sharing chi with his patients. He always said he wasn't using his own chi, but still, I just wondered, why he was so animated after, 7 or 8 hours of work, seeing so many people, just 3 people at a time, one after the other. But he seems to be energized by it. And he's 90 now, right now, and he's still seeing 20 patients a day, 4 days a week. Well, he's got a condition in his back that makes it hard for him to stand. So he has to sit on a stool anymore. He's quite old at 90. And so even that, he's actually moving chi and balancing chi in himself each time he works with a patient. In other words, it's intersubjective, and it's acupuncture at that level it's like martial arts, where it's almost miraculous when people reach a level of mastery that they can do what they do at their age. And he seems to be doing it, even with a lot of physical pain. He appears, and I wonder why he does it, because he could retire. He's got more money than he needs. And yet he keeps doing it because what? It helps his health. There'd be no other reason he'd be practicing still if it wasn't for himself. Of course, he wants to help his patients, but his patients don't want him to quit either.
Yes. Well, I think there's something, we often think about that. Oh, I got enough money, I can just quit and do whatever I want. But one of the really, I think, great benefits of doing the work that we do is it gives the day a deep infusion of meaning. And there's something about being connected to a practice or a work or a something that brings meaning into our life. It's kind of a fountain of youth, I think, right? Meaningless lives, people take their own life when they don't have meaning in it.
Yeah, I agree completely. And meaning is kind of a chi. It is currency. It goes between people. And it's exactly right. Dr. Shudo's work has shown me that acupuncture is a way, as they say in Japan, a do, and it heightens to the level of, not just cultivation, but mastery. And there's no end. And it's a win-win situation. In other words, both people are learning, both people are cultivating and harmonizing their chi each time they do it. And of course, this is really completely different from the Western medical idea of there's a doctor who's okay, and there's a patient who's sick, and the doctor with his knowledge and technique is making the patient better. Whereas with martial arts or qigong or acupuncture and body work as well, actually each person is gaining each time at different levels, but each person is gaining. And I think this is the dimension of our medicine that is often laid aside, because there are a lot of techniques and there are a lot of knowledge to be gained. But if we drop that part, I think we lose some of the meaning, because it just becomes another business and another capitalistic venture where I'm going to earn my, money, which is fine. Of course we will. But there's meaning there. There's some deep meaning that connects us back to the source of our medicine as human and as life.
Well, you were talking about E. Yeah, you were talking about E. And one of the translations of E, like Isa, it's meaning. Like E is meaning. E is significance. E is that which connects with meaning. You can make a case for that, I think. And at the same time, Stephen, it brings me back to something you said earlier. I wrote it down because it struck me. You said more than I could possibly understand, right? So we've got everything that we bring to it and all the years of experience or not. And there's always more than we can possibly understand. That uncertainty, that the rest of that elephant is always there in some capacity.
Yeah, but it's great because it's sort of supportively there. It's like I'm the center of the universe, and the rest of the universe is in support of me if I'm in harmony. And if I'm not in harmony, it's a lot of trouble. But chaos or uncertainty or complexity is not a problem if I'm harmonized. And therefore, if I'm holding the tail of the elephant just right, there's this ginormous thing I can't see because remember, I'm blind in that analogy that can pull me along or do. It's an amazing universe if I'm not at odds with it. And that's our work, is to find that sweet spot. And sometimes, I'm sorry, it doesn't quite happen with a certain patient, but that doesn't mean we won't keep trying because we've had that amazing connection where we didn't quite know what was going on, but we did something and something shifted for both of us, the patient and ourselves. And that's what's wonderful about the Shudo style is at each point, you can have that little subtle feeling of reassurance from the combination of their chi and your chi. It's like a handshake. It says, hey, how are you? Great. And there's this wonderful warm surge that goes both directions. I don't know what it is. Not knowing what it is even makes it more alluring in some ways. But again, Westerners are a little bit squeamish about subjectivity.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner. Because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital chi. And that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
Well, my friend, it sounds and we're squeamish about not having data and some authority saying this is real and this is okay. It's kind of it's something. I don't know the word for being able to stand in a place with some unknowing, some capacity for kind of tracking the void, as Chip Chase used to say, and be engaged with our patients, with some things that are known or perceivable and many that are not. And as you said, it's an amazing universe when I'm not at odds with it.
So that's where practice and cultivation comes in, is that if we're sloppy and just, we can just babble on about these things, but when the rubber meets the road, when we meet our patients who's in pain or suffering, we're pushed to a point where we have to find some way to harmonize the ground and find some harmony within ourselves to face the disharmony. So we need to practice both with patients and without patients. And that practice has a certain, framework. It has to have a certain structure. And we can't just be sloppy with structure. And, you don't practice meridian therapy as far as I know. You have a style that you've accumulated and distilled into your own. And this is uniquely Michael. Dr. Shudo said the same thing to me. He said, Stephen, you can try learning the Shudo style, but in the end, it's going to have to be a Brown style. It's going to have to be your subjective tool set of goods. Any martial artist has their own techniques. And unless you practice those techniques in real life situations and with yourself, both, Dr. Shudo is really big on self-practice without patience, needling yourself, for instance, so that your hands know what to do. You're tuned and ready to heal, like a martial artist would be tuned and ready to fight. And if you don't do that, this becomes really sloppy, nonsensical stuff that the other side poo-poos, because it is. It's just a lot of new age mishmash that doesn't result in anything. But if we are paying attention, E again, and if we practice, we cultivate, we grow a subjective sense of where we need to be in terms of now I'm balanced, grounded, and this is where they're not balanced. And this is where, and we have, and that's where the medicine comes in. But for hands-on practice, I'm not sure for herbs, but it's true for body work and acupuncture and moxa too, how you want to be able to deliver the technique almost mindlessly, almost without having to pay any attention to the technique, and using your E toward the patient and with the patient. And again, I think this is where our profession is deficient. We really work on CEUs and knowledge, but technique, not as much. And I'm hoping most of us spend a lot of time honing our intention with meditation or other kinds of training. It could be just gardening or taking care of animals, the subjective realm that doesn't respond to force. You can't force a horse or a cat. And you can't force a patient.
Well, for sure.
And that's the thing.
You can entice them, though.
Yeah, you could.
But, and I think in some ways our work does entice people. Hands-on work, gentle work, touch that is respectful and communicative. There's a kind of enticement. There's an invitation to let your physiology soak something in that it would otherwise maybe be guarded against. I think a lot of troubles, I think about my own life, a lot of troubles aren't the things I got, it's the things I'm guarding against, and it sets up tensions and it sets up stressors. And, often enough will cut you off from the very nourishment that you need.
Yeah, you mentioned a very important word about stressors, because Dr. Shudo stated even 25 years ago, before the millennium, that the 21st century was the age of the mind, and that our clinic, we would be treating more mental, read physical, or more emotional over physical problems. Although physical problems are there, emotional problems will predominate in the 21st century because of the stressors and the amount of data and everything's moving so fast these days that everyone's under more stress. And that's the key thing, where gentling or listening seems to be more conducive to healing that than force.
Have you seen that play out in your clinical work?
Definitely. And I'm using a lot more non-needling techniques, or, where actually I'll use what's called teishin or silver. They're not needles, but they're tools. And I do things more on the head. I mean, in the first half of my profession, I've been in practice less than 40 years, about 35, but the first 15, 20 years, I didn't do scalp and ear that much. Because one thing Dr. Shudo says is if a person has a lot of emotional issues or stress, retaining needles or even inserting needles is counterproductive, because their system needs to settle, and that you shouldn't insert needles very much. But I still retain needles in the scalp and the ears. Dr. Shudo doesn't do very many scalp needles, but I really feel that scalp and ear acupuncture are key in stress work. So yes, I'm doing a lot more.
Mm-hmm. You've come around to that in your work. It's
psychosomatic work.
Yeah. It's, we're lucky to practice long enough to watch yourself go through different stages of perception and development and practice. And I was going to say knowledge. Knowledge is a piece, yes, important. From talking to you today, my friend, I'm reminded to have a little more appreciation for what we don't know and to be a little friendly with it. But I want to come back and finish with some knowing here, because you do have this book of Dr. Shudo's like 50 years of practice. And would you take just a minute or two to share with the listeners what they would find in that thing, what they'd find in that book?
Well, this book, 50 Years of Practice, Clinical Case Histories of Shudo Denmei, is the third in a series of books I've translated. And it's sort of the opus magnum in a sense. In fact, if you're going to buy one book or look at one, this is better than the first two, because it shows an evolution of a practitioner. And you said very well that it's good to stay in practice a while because you start to learn some things that you can only learn by being in practice. And he describes his early years and his, what kind of things he was treating. And you'll see that he was retaining needles a lot more. And then you see the progression to more and more psychosomatic type treatments. And he talks a lot about treating the mind, because interestingly enough, he's also a scholar and he's read the classics a lot, and he sees the Zangfu as being the seat of the mind, not just the emotions. And he really feels that stress is treated by balancing the Zangfu, not I do scalp needling, but he does that. So, and he'll talk about his needle techniques. His signature technique is super rotation technique, where he twists a needle on the skin surface without inserting. So he'll go through every type of condition, from musculoskeletal to just aging, and talk about where he's been successful and where he's not been successful. That's why I love him, his honesty. He doesn't have only the successful case histories, and he'll critique himself. And this is very helpful, particularly if you're beginning and you're wondering if you can have any success with a certain condition if you've never treated it before. It'd be very useful. And so I highly recommend it. And the good news is there's a lot of video of his work on YouTube. And if you just Google search Shudo Denmei, you'll see me also translating for him, but you'll see him in his own clinic, and you get to see what this SRT technique, super rotation technique, looks like, and how can it actually work. If you're used to just retaining or inserting needles.
I will. So how does it work? What is it about super rotation technique on the very, very, very surface there?
It's the skin. The skin is the most sensitive and intelligent part of where the needle may encounter. Remember, where do you pay the most attention? Usually when you're inserting the needle is to what we call break the skin, because the skin is that sensitive. So there's a lot of qi there. And traditionally in the summer and the spring, you were supposed to be at the wei qi level, which is the skin, or a little bit below the skin. It depends on how much qi and where the qi is. But if it's winter and the qi is deep, but somehow in Chinese styles in recent history, with the number of hospitals and number of patients being treated, they just simplified it to one size fits all. And it does work. We can't argue with that. Retained needles is a good way to go for some patients, but the skin is very sensitive. And you've seen those sensitive patients who balk at, deep needles. So it's worth learning for a whole set of patients.
And I suspect even the less sensitive ones might find some benefit there as well. And it seems to me also, and this just comes from having, when we're laying on a table and someone's about to stick a needle in us, we're a little sensitive, a little hyper aware.
Or when you're under stress, you're more sensitive. In other words, whenever our whole system, when you're closer to fight and flight, whenever your nervous system becomes more sensitive or alert, that's the time when the skin is a very potent place to interface the qi.
And we could go on forever. Well, I don't know about forever, but for a long time about, needle technique and just thinking about how we interact with the body and what levels it is. And, we probably should land this plane for now, but we'll probably have to come back and talk about this other topic at another time. Just want to let you know I will put some of those links to Dr. Shudo's YouTube videos up on the show notes page so people have quick access to that. And then folks can go to Eastland Press to get your book, right?
Yes, eastlandpress.com.
Excellent. Well, Stephen Brown, it's always a delight to talk with you. Will you come back and hang out with me again at some point? We'll have another conversation about needle technique.
I'd love to. It'd be my pleasure.
All right, my friend. Until next time, then. Medicine sells itself on evidence and certainty. It cozies up to science so as to put up a buffer against uncertainty. And in our East Asian medicine world, we lean on our long history to keep the winds of the unknown at bay. I appreciate Stephen's friendly disposition toward uncertainty, that it's not something to be gotten rid of, but instead to be on friendly terms with. For one, because, well, that's the nature of the world in which we live, and secondly, because within uncertainty, there can be resources and healing that only show up as you engage the explorative process of treatment. Furthermore, beyond getting friendly with uncertainty, finding a way to be on better terms with our process of learning and development, realizing that mastery takes considered experience over the course of decades, that we need to leave some room for recognizing where we got it wrong because it will help us to be more accurate with our work in the future. And having teachers like Dr. Shudo to help remind us that it's not what we know, but how we engage with the process of finding out. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.